Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me tonight. My name is Joe Sweeney. I'm Associate Director of Admissions here at Notre Dame. Thanks so much for jumping on to our MBA Application Q&A webinar. Tonight we'll have kind of a very brief run through on some of the criteria, but it's really all about your questions for tonight. A couple technical points. Please go ahead and use the Q&A feature in the webinar instead of the chat feature. That will allow me to track your questions a little bit better as we go through the evening. And we'll stay for up to about an hour with as many questions as you've got. So feel free to fire off questions at any point along the way. I'll refer you to a couple of specific points in the slides as we go through, but feel free to ask a question at any time, and we'll cover as much as we can in the next hour or so. I'm going to go ahead and throw off my camera here so you can focus in on the presentation, what we're looking at, and we'll get going here. All right, so we'll kind of start off by touching on a couple of the application components. I'll give a little bit of tips on some of those subgroups, and then we'll finish up with some more technical specifics for application deadlines, and then, of course, all of your questions along the way. So when you sign into your application, it's going to look more or less just like this as you get started. As you go through, you'll be able to kind of go ahead and take a look at all the different component elements of the application if you haven't already, and really get a sense on some of the more detailed instructions for the application as you go through the process. A couple just kind of introductory questions to get you put into the right buckets for our processing. One of the biggest things, and most folks are usually kind of set on this already, is which program specifically are you going to be looking at? And if you are looking at either the one-year program versus the two-year program, do you want us to consider both of those? Again, that doesn't have any bearing on your application, just kind of helps from our standpoint from a processing side of things. In terms of the overall application requirements, what are we looking for? So we do ask for an essay, statement of purpose. This is something that's a little newer for us this year, so if anybody's started an application before or is potentially reapplying, that is something that's new this year. That's a little bit more just kind of about how the MBA program will impact your future plans. Really, why are you doing this? Why is this the right thing for you? We do ask for a slide presentation, which we'll get into a little bit later, a current resume. We'll ask for 2 letters of recommendation, academic transcripts, an official GMAT or GRE test score, and for international students, proof of English language proficiency. We'll get into each of those a little bit more specifically. All right, let's start with the essay and statement of purpose. So we do have 2 different essay choices as you go through. Choice is completely up to you. There's a little bit more robust wording and background in the application itself, but kind of the crux of the questions are numbers 1 and 2 here on the slide. A lot of times folks are looking to see if there's a specific answer. What am I really looking for when I'm going through and reading essays? There are always a number of different things that our team goes through and looks for when looking at an essay. Part of it's the quality of your writing. Part of it's the story that you're trying to tell. Are you answering the question thoughtfully? Are you putting it into the context of your own life? What does that really look like? From a length standpoint, 2 typewritten pages is perfect. Don't feel like you need to fill it perfectly. If you feel a little short, but you've communicated what you want to say and your ideas well, that's totally fine. That just kind of helps to put a little bit of parameter on it so that we're not reading novels by some people and short stories by others. So right in the ballpark of 2 pages is great. As I mentioned, we do ask for a statement of purpose, and that's our number 3 on the slide here. So, as you're thinking about making a major investment in yourself, going back and getting an MBA, how does that impact your short-term professional goals? In short, you're going to spend 1 year or 2 years doing the MBA program. What comes after, and how does the MBA play a positive role in that? All right, one of the big things that is a little bit unique for us compared to some of the other applications that you may be looking at as you're going through the process right now is we do ask for a PowerPoint slide presentation. So you can submit up to 4 slides, and we request no more than that. And it's really pretty open-ended from there. This is really a great opportunity for you to bring a little bit more of who you are outside of work, outside of the academic realm, into the application. It's a great way for us to get to know you a little bit better. Uh, you know, as somebody that reads a lot of applications, one of the things that I'll say from the PowerPoint standpoint is it's typically one of our favorite parts of the application to read because we get to see a little bit more of your personality. Your essay, your grades, your transcripts, your resume, that's all fairly black and white, but you really get to add a little bit of color into who you are as a person and what you would bring to the program beyond just your academic ability. So because of that, we leave that fairly open-ended, and that's on purpose. Again, there really isn't a right answer here. Some people love to include pictures. Some people who have great artistic talents, have shared either cartoon sketches or original drawings with us in that space. Some people have sent us presentations that they've worked on in a professional setting that captures something that's really important to them. So this is really kind of an open forum for you to be able to share whatever you think is important about you that you want us to know in the space of 4 slides. One thing that I would recommend is the system will force you to upload in more of a PDF format. So go ahead and craft your slides in something like PowerPoint or a similar platform. Take a look at them before you upload your slides into the system, because if your formatting is a little funky, sometimes that can kind of stretch out your slides a little bit, and maybe that will impact the way that you would want them to be viewed. The next key element is your resume. So one of the big things that the MBA program always kind of focuses on from formatting and a presentation standpoint, the types of recruiters that you're going to be interacting with are generally going to prefer a single page resume and something that's fairly succinct. A lot of times different industries and different organizations will have different approaches to how that works. As somebody that works in academia, I can tell you I've seen plenty of 10 and 15 page resumes. Within the MBA space, really looking for a 1-page resume, boil it down to your key experiences, and use that as a way to kind of start that conversation. That's something that will be reviewed in the context of the application. It's something that as we get into the interview process for those who are invited to interview, it will come into play there as well. Recommendations. So with the letters of recommendation, we do require 2. You can have a 3rd if you feel it's important. We always get a lot of questions on, who should I ask to be my recommender? The biggest thing that I would say is important in terms of asking someone to write a recommendation is pick somebody that knows you well and can speak well to your strengths and your abilities. A lot of times folks want to ask somebody that has a flashy title or, seems really important, in an external context. I care a lot less about that. I'd much rather have a direct supervisor who has, some boring title than to have a CEO or a senator or something like that who has a flashier title but doesn't actually know who you are and doesn't really know your abilities very well. If you happen to work directly for the CEO and you've got great access, awesome. If you can call in a favor and get that letter of recommendation, but the CEO doesn't really know you, I care less about that. I'd rather have your supervisor or somebody that you work with on a more direct basis. In terms of the timing for those letters of recommendation, they have a little bit more flexibility than you do. As we go through, we'll kind of highlight which items need to be received to us by the application deadline in order to be considered complete. For the recommendations, we just need to know who your recommenders are by that date. The recommenders don't have to put the recommendation in by the application date. So they've got a little bit more leeway from that standpoint. Hopefully at this point, if you're thinking about submitting your application for the deadline next week, hopefully you've already had that conversation with some of your recommenders and said, hey, just a heads up, this is going to be coming out. For folks that are applying to a number of different schools, a lot of schools are starting to use the GMAC Common Letter of Recommendation. We are a part of that, so if you're applying to multiple schools, chances are your recommenders will only have to fill out that recommendation form once, and then it will get sent to all of your schools. I believe their website has a listing of all of the different schools that are part of that, so you can kind of double check if you're concerned about that. But generally, that kind of streamlines things a little bit for folks going through the application process. All right, test scores. This is one that we always get a lot of questions on. We do require either the GRE or the GMAT as part of your application. The official score does not have to be received by the deadline, and in fact, you don't even have to officially have taken the test by then either. There's a section on the application that you can indicate a future test date. So, if you've already got it scheduled, but you're not taking the test until January 15th, but you still want to submit your application for the deadline next week, you can indicate a future test date and we'll hold your application until that score is received. We can also process applications with unofficial test scores. So if you've got your printout from the exam center, you can upload that and then send the official score after, and we can go ahead and process with the unofficial score. That's fine. The big thing that folks always ask about is, how important is this? Is it a make or break? What does my number really mean here? The biggest thing that I always say in reply is we always take a very holistic approach to looking at an application. So I think a lot of times folks get really hung up on the GMAT score because it's something that gets a lot of press, it gets a lot of attention. It's an easy metric to kind of point to as you're comparing schools on an apples to apples basis. But really, it's one minor piece of your application. There's a lot more that goes into the context of who you are and what's going to make you successful going through the application process. Your work history, your prior academics, the quality of your recommendations, those are all things that are very important in context as well. And then, of course, your fit for the program is also very important. Here at Notre Dame, we're a relatively small program, so having the right type of people is as important as having a great GMAT score. I mean, every year we have scenarios where we have students with scores that are over 750 and don't get admitted because of other factors in the application. And, on the flip side of that, we've got folks who will come in with a lower GMAT score, maybe something that's under 600, but have a lot of other great things that really support their application and make them a great candidate for us. You can see I put the middle 80% ranges for our current students for both GMAT and GRE. So that's kind of a good kind of rounding point for you to think about in terms of the score ranges. This is where the bulk of the class is falling in a given year. Obviously, you've got a little bit more leeway outside of that with the extra 10%, but that's kind of where the crux of the class is falling. The interview is another key point to the application itself. We do offer both on-campus and virtual interviews. We also offer a limited number of opportunities for some off-campus interviews. When our team travels, we'll offer those explicitly. So we've got interviews available in 5 cities upcoming in January. So if you happen to be in Boston, New York, Seattle, San Francisco, or Los Angeles, you can go onto the website right now, and if you click into events and then off campus, they'll have some interview time slots that are available in each of those cities. Krista McAndrew, who's our Director of Admissions, will be doing the interviews in Boston and New York, and I will be doing the interviews in Seattle, San Francisco, and LA. So if you're going through and you've either submitted your application for round 2, or if you're thinking about submitting your application in round 3 and you want to do the interview in person in your home city, you can select into that. Otherwise, if you can make it out to campus, it's always great to be able to get to see us in person, great to get a feel for the university and the campus as a whole and see where you might be spending a couple of years of your life. That's a great way to do it. But I would say at this point, the majority of our interviews are done virtually, just for the sake of ease and convenience and, of course, cost. Not everybody can make it from their hometown all the way to campus here. So we do offer that as an option. That's something that doesn't change the way that we view your interview or your application based on how you do the interview. It's just going to make a difference in terms of your availability to connect with us. Interviews typically last about 45 minutes to an hour. Of course, we'll have plenty of time for your questions. Our interview style is meant to be much more conversational. It's meant to be a good way to get to know you and kind of round out that fit portion of the application. It's not meant to be something to trip you up, so don't be nervous. Don't freak out about, am I answering a question the wrong way? Just be yourself, speak authentically, and try and be as comfortable as you can as you go through the process. Once we get all the applications in for the deadline, we'll start to make invitations to interview. So if you get that invitation, then you can go ahead and select your preferred format, whether it's on campus or virtual or off campus. If you know that you're going to be on campus, or if you're in one of the off-campus sites and want to set up an interview just based on the timing and availability, you can do that through the website at any time. All right, deadlines. So round 2 is kind of the big one. Hopefully a lot of you folks are thinking about getting your applications in early next week. So our deadline is January 8th. We have a number of rounds that are set up. It's as much as an administrative tool for us as it is setting some expectations for you. So if you have your application in January 8th and it's completed, we receive all the different components that are required, you'll get a decision back to you by March 15th. And then for round 3, March 19th for a May 3rd decision, and round 4, April 9th for a May 10th decision. We do recommend for any international applicants to apply just a little bit earlier. We'll try and get through those applications a little bit faster than maybe some of those firm back-end decision mail deadlines, because we know that there are additional steps that are required to go through the visa process and everything like that. Historically, even folks that have applied in that March timeframe and gotten a May decision for starting classes in August haven't had issues with visas, but it's nicer to have a little bit more of a cushion. And obviously, if you're making a pretty significant transition like that, it helps to have a little bit more time in terms of peace of mind. So we do recommend that international applicants apply by February 1st, and we'll kind of give special priority to those to make sure that you've got enough time as you go through. The decision mail deadline is kind of the back-end deadline for us. If we get everything kind of squared away and we're ready to release some of the decisions a little bit earlier, we'll go ahead and do that. So you may hear back from us a little bit before that deadline. That's definitely a possibility. But our commitment to you is, if you have all the items in, that will get you a deadline or a final decision no later than that deadline as you go through. One of the key things to look for in the application itself is the fellowship portion. We always get a lot of questions about that. Folks want to know, what does it take to be considered for a fellowship? So I'm looking at this now. This is actually from our Master of Science in Management application, but it looks the same in the MBA application as well. If you want to be considered for a merit-based fellowship, all you need to do is say yes, and then type your name there as well. So that's all it takes. The committee will go ahead and review that as we go through and review your application. Should you be admitted, any fellowship award would be included in your letter of admission, so you can know that information up front. All right. So one of the things that will throw your way for joining us this evening is our application fee waiver. So as you go through on the application, there's the opportunity to waive the $175 application fee. You can do that by just typing in Irish Web into the box and hitting continue, and it'll go ahead and throw that in. So that's kind of an extra thank you for you for joining us tonight and engaging with us this evening. One last point to make for me, and then we'll just jump right into your questions. So again, feel free to keep sending your questions in. Is which items do we need from you on the decision deadline? We need the portions that you are directly responsible for. So the application itself, which is the form online, the resume, your essay, your slide presentation. We will need to make up, we'll need to know who your recommenders are and when your test will be if you haven't done it already. Or if you know your score already, include that in the application. And those are the pieces that we'll need from you. One of the questions that we always get from a timing standpoint is, does it have to be in, exactly by the stroke of midnight? Yes and no. There's a deadline for a reason, but nobody's sitting at the computer at 12:01 saying, nope, that's it. So if you get it in, if your computer crashes at 11:50 on Tuesday evening, don't freak out, don't panic. It's fine. We can still get you rolled into the round. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and jump into a couple of your questions. Just go ahead and fire them away. We'll get to as many as we can in the time that we have left. All right, first question from, I'm presuming an international student here. If I'm from a country where English is the official language, do I still need the English proficiency test? No, as long as you have attended a university for at least 3 semesters that does its primary instruction in English, that'll count, for Canadians, Kiwis, Aussies, etc. If English is the official language of the country, you don't need to worry about that. Or if you've attended a university where the primary language of instruction is English for more than 3 semesters, that'll count as well. So if you've studied in the US previously, or if your institution in your home country does its primary instruction in English, that can be waived as well. All right, if our coursework does not have a numerical grade, how should we answer GPA? So as we go through, we get grades that come in a lot of different formats. So if your coursework doesn't directly fit into your typical 4.0 GPA, that's totally fine. We'll take a look at it in the appropriate context. A lot of international universities are on either a 10-point scale or a 100-point scale. Some of the US universities are on, a 4.5 scale or a 5.0 scale as well. So that's something that our team is pretty familiar with because we see folks sending in transcripts from, a lot of different systems. And so we'll view that kind of independently there. So don't worry about having something that's converted specifically into something on a 4.0 scale. Our team will go ahead and take a look at that and make that judgment based on the scale that your school provides. Typically, the universities will also provide to us a rubric on how that's their scale is set out and kind of what the expectations are. A lot of times too, they'll have specific criteria on what different levels are in terms of either honors or distinction and merit, things like that. All right, fellowships question is up next. What makes up merit? That's a great question. So for merit, there's a lot of things that go into it. The primary drivers are typically going to be test scores, work experience, and prior academic performance. Those are kind of the easy measurables. But there are other factors that go into that as well. Things such as the quality of your work experience, the quality of your recommendations, and the quality of the interview as you go through. So there's kind of a lot of different little sub-factors that go into play for that. Your kind of 3 core metrics that are going to drive the kind of big direction of it are typically going to be your harder measurables, the test, your GPA, and the amount of work experience that you have. In terms of the size of the fellowships, those can range anywhere from $10,000 up to full tuition plus a living stipend. For students currently in the program, 86% of students are receiving a fellowship of some amount. The average award this year was just over $32,000, which is more than half of our current tuition. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of where folks are coming in from that standpoint. All right. A couple more questions here. Some questions about the score timing. In terms of getting the scores in, again, you can self-report as you put them in into the application, and at some point before you enroll, we'll have to have the official score report. Usually that doesn't take too long to get from the testing center to us. So if you indicated Notre Dame as one of your recipient schools when you took the test, we usually get that within the span of a couple weeks. If you didn't when you sat for the test, but you are admitted, we'll need to have that at some point before you officially enroll. So you'll have to order that, and I believe there's a nominal fee. In terms of having those scores to be able to hit submit on the application by the deadline, you don't actually have to have them in hand. And again, if you've got a photocopy or a photo of the printout that you get from the test center itself, that works just fine to get us started on the processing. Okay. Similarly related question, is GMAT preferred over the GRE, and are there any waiver for either of those tests? Unfortunately, there's no waiving of the testing requirement. It doesn't matter if you've got a certification or if you've got other qualifications. One of those 2 tests needs to be submitted, and it has to be a valid score. So for GRE and GMAT, typically a valid score is going to be within 5 years of your testing date. So if you took the GMAT for the first time in 2012, that score is not valid anymore. I can't get that from the testing center, so that's something that you'll have to take again. In terms of which test to take, totally up to you. Doesn't matter to us which one you're going to take. We've got a lot of students that apply with both or with either, so it's something that we're familiar with, and there's plenty of ways for us to be able to evaluate that. We know the strengths of the test relative to each other and how that impacts your performance and your scores. Historically, more people have taken the GMAT, so that tends to kind of over-index in the amount of volume that we see coming in. But from our standpoint, it really doesn't matter. Whatever you feel most comfortable with is really the best way to go. All right, a question about the optional essay. And forgive me, I didn't talk about this earlier on, so thank you for asking. Does it have a specific format, or are there any requirements for that? For the supplemental essay, for the optional essay, that's kind of a free form opportunity for you to tell us anything else that you think is important about your application that we might not know otherwise. So a lot of times applicants will use this to give us a little bit more context about something that either they feel is a standout in maybe not a positive way in their application, or to give us a little bit more context on something. If you had a semester where your grades really tanked, but it's because you spent the entire semester in the hospital recovering from an injury, those are some extenuating circumstances that provide us a little bit more context in the scope of your application. Things like that. So it doesn't have to be a specific format. If you've got additional information that you want us to know about your background, your context that you think is important in terms of us evaluating the application, you can use that personal statement to be able to do that in the format you want. So it doesn't necessarily need to be paragraph form, doesn't need to be an essay or anything like that. If you want to bullet point it, that's totally fine. All right, we'll keep rolling here. Keep your questions coming in. These are great. Got a question about the MBA MSBA program and how the visas work for that. So the MBA MSBA dual degree program, it is our 2-year program, and it does come with a STEM designation. So that's particularly important for our international students. It has an impact on the amount of work authorization that you can receive with your student visa. So that's fairly unique within the MBA space at this point. It changes the work authorization from 1 year post-graduation to up to 3 years post-graduation. So that's a nice way to be able to kind of round out that experience. So that's something that everyone in the program, in the dual degree program, is automatically eligible for by the designation. I would refer anybody kind of interested in that program to the website to get a little bit more on some of the qualifications for that program specifically. All right, next question is about GPA. Is there a minimum GPA to apply to the program, or how do I offset a lower GPA? There's not a minimum GPA. You know, again, GPA is one of those things that we look at in context. Our average GPA usually comes in around 3.3 or 3.4 on a traditional 4.0 scale. You know, but we've seen folks with a lot of different academic performances come through. You know, we get 4.0s, we get 2.0s, and as we're going through and evaluating that, again, we're looking at kind of the strength of your application holistically. So, you know, again, if there are extenuating circumstances within the context of your academic career that help to contribute to that, that can be part of it. If there are other things that really help to balance out a weaker GPA, you know, such as a great test score or really great work experience with very strong recommendations, those things can kind of balance out in aggregate. So, you know, there isn't a specific score that I'm looking for in any of those, you know, measurable fields, but it's kind of how everything comes together in that complete picture of, you know, who you are and your ability. The biggest thing that I always look for when going through and evaluating candidates in terms of some of those harder measurable numbers is, do I have confidence based on what you've shown me that you can be academically successful here in the program? You know, I never want to admit somebody that I think isn't capable of actually doing the work and keeping up. And so that's part of that process for us, is really figuring out, can you be successful here? All right. Interview invitations, when do those typically go out? You know, those can kind of come out at any time. So I don't have a great answer for you on that. You know, we'll do the bulk of them pretty soon, pretty shortly after the round closes. And, you know, just from a processing standpoint, we want to get those through. You know, sometimes on our team, they'll come, you know, you may get a couple that will start to kind of trickle out this week for applications that have already been submitted prior to the deadline. There may be some that, you know, will go through the process and get read once or twice, and then, you know, will come with a little bit of a later invitation. The bulk of them will probably go out within the next week or so. We'll probably try and get those out as close to the submission deadline as we can, just to get everybody scheduled and to get those interviews going. All right, rolling on here. Excuse me. If I was already on campus for a tour and an interview, will I need to interview again? It will depend a little bit on the timing. If it's within the context of the past application cycle, so, you know, say June-ish through now, you won't need to interview again. And so that'll already be indicated in your file to us. We won't need to actually go through and make that invitation to interview. That'll already be finalized. If it was, you know, kind of outside of that, if it was, you know, a year ago, maybe a little bit more ago, we'll probably ask for an interview again, just because we'll want to kind of catch up on what you've done in the meantime. All right. If you're looking to retake the GMAT and you're still trying to make either the application deadline or for international students before February 1st, what's the deadline to report the new score? The thing that I always say is the quicker you can get it to us, the better. There isn't necessarily a hard deadline for that. We'll process your application once we receive that score kind of as quickly as we can. So the sooner it gets to us, the sooner we can go through and read through all those other pieces. The way that our process works internally here, every application is seen by at least 2 different sets of eyes. Typically, it's going to be more on the lines of 3 to 4 different sets of eyes that will see you, but they're not going to start doing that evaluation until you've got all your pieces in. So if you're looking to retake the GMAT, we're going to hold your application until that new score comes in. So the sooner that you can get it to us, the sooner we can get back to you from that standpoint. All right. Here's a great question. How does the admissions committee view external coursework, for example, something like HBX core as part of preparation for the MBA program? It's not a specific, gradable kind of thing that will include, at the same kind of level as your degree work from undergrad, but there are a lot of great benefits for something like that. It shows kind of a commitment to the business space. It shows that you're continuing to better yourself, and it shows that you're dedicated to that learning and to really improving and gaining the knowledge. So that's always a plus from that standpoint. A lot of times we've had students that have been interested in demonstrating more of a certain type of skill set. So, if they've got something that's similar or, maybe a professional certification or something like that, those are all great ways to kind of round out, who you are and your ability and kind of your dedication to self-improvement and furthering your business education. Those are always good supporting points, even though they're kind of a little outside of that traditional box of here's my degree, here's my test score, things like that. So yeah, the committee will go ahead and review anything like that you want to send in. It's not necessarily going to replace a different piece of it, but it's another way to kind of round out your application. All right, keep going here with a couple more questions. We've got a couple that maybe folks joined in a little bit late for, but we'll revisit a little bit. If the recommenders take a little bit longer, how does that impact? Again, the only thing that we need for the application deadline itself, so for the January 8th deadline, is the name and email address for your recommenders. They don't have to have the recommendation to us by then. We will go ahead and process your application as soon as we have all of those pieces in. So, if that's the last thing that your application needs, then we'll go ahead and do all the processing as soon as that final recommendation comes in. Your recommenders will get an automated response from us, and then they will also get an automated set of reminders from us as well if they're not too Johnny on the spot with their recommendations. But they don't have to have it to us by January 8th for you to be considered in the round 2 application pool. So don't worry about that. All right. Another question that we kind of touched on a little bit, but we'll go ahead and circle back to it. Tips on the slide presentation. The biggest thing there is just be yourself. That's what I want to see there. I want to know, who you are. What are you all about? What makes you excited? What makes you, what are you passionate about? I see all sorts of stuff in those slide presentations, from pictures of people's families to their dogs to travel pictures to projects that they've worked on at work to photos from undergrad to things that they've sketched out themselves. So have a little fun with it. Don't overthink it. Be yourself. That's really the biggest thing that I want to see there. There's no magic answer. There's no silver bullet there from the slide presentation. Just be yourself there. All right. I've got a couple general questions that have popped up in here as well. So we'll go ahead and uh, throw these out here. These are a little less application specific and more program specific, but we'll go ahead and answer them here anyway. Question about the veteran community at Notre Dame and kind of what that's all about, and how to get in touch with that group. So I take the lead from an admissions standpoint for veterans recruiting. So, I'm happy to talk with anybody offline about that more directly in terms of kind of the scope of it. Usually about 15% of our incoming 2-year class are either active duty military, direct transitioning military veterans, or vets who have already been out and either going through educational programs or work experiences before. It's a really incredible community of support. They're very, very active within the MBA program. So we've typically got about 40 vets and active duty military officers on campus at a given time within the program. So it's a really great community of support there. Definitely be happy to talk to anybody offline about that. And the club is really great about outreach as well. So we'll go ahead and make sure that they can follow up with you as well. Another club question here, talking about MBA Tech Club. Last year they hosted the inaugural MBA Tech Innovation Challenge with SAP and Thomson Reuters. And case competitions are one of those things that are kind of a great way to engage in the MBA space. So how does that work in terms of joining case competitions, participating? Is that open to everyone? What is selection process like? In terms of case competitions that are outside of Mendoza specifically, most of the top business schools will host a competition that focuses on something. A lot of times it's an area that the school kind of specializes in. And usually there's kind of a couple round selection process. So typically there's a group within Mendoza that will kind of form ahead of time and say, this is the timing, these are the focuses, and figure out who's going to be the right team to submit from there. That's a little bit less of a formal process internally, and then most of the case competitions themselves have specific criteria for their selection as they get into the process. So you as a team will submit your initial proposal, and then they'll make the selections from there. For the one here on campus, that works the same way. The Mendoza teams have to run through the same selection process as any of the visiting school representatives as well. We do have the luxury of being right here, so usually the schools will sponsor a team to travel to another university, or maybe a couple teams to travel to another university. Since we're here, it kind of opens the door a little bit more to some more teams from that standpoint. The club is, again, a great resource there. You can find information about the club on the website and reach out to current members, and they'll have a lot more information for you. All right. Does the age of the applicant matter in the admissions process? And if so, is there a range that we look for? No, it really doesn't. We've got folks that, kind of run in a fairly wide range within the program currently. I would say your sweet spot for MBA is typically, about 3 to 6 years worth of work experience. That's where you'll find the bulk of the students in the program, and that's fairly typical within the MBA space. But we have students that have as little as 2 years of work experience and are 23, 24 years old. We have students that have 20 years of work experience and are over 40. That's a little bit more of an extreme example, but we did have a couple of students that had full careers within the military, retired, and then decided they wanted to do a full-time program to take advantage of everything the MBA has to offer. So it really doesn't make a difference from our standpoint. In terms of the age, there are a number of things to consider from that standpoint, though, in terms of what's going to be most beneficial for you. Usually, if an applicant has more than, say, 10 years of work experience, that's usually when you kind of start to think about maybe looking at executive programs, because it's going to be a little bit more in line with kind of the amount of experience that your peers might have. If you're less than 2 years of experience, a lot of times folks in that range will start to look a little bit more at some specialized master's programs like a master in management program, which we also offer, or a master of science in business analytics, which those programs tend to be targeted a little bit more toward folks that are pre-experienced, that don't have a lot of work experience yet. One of the important things with the MBA program is a lot of what you're going to do both in the classroom and in your general learning is going to be applying what you're learning to the experience that you've already had and learning from the experiences of everyone that's around you. So it kind of changes that approach a little bit based on how much experience you have. But at the end of the day, the age doesn't really matter. It's how it fits into the context of what you're trying to achieve, and is that will you be able to contribute appropriately? All right. Couple more questions here. Looking at the dual degree program again, MBA, MSBA program. Does it help to have either education courses or continuing courses related to business analytics from other universities? Again, that's kind of one of those supplemental things like a core or an external certification. We'll take a look at all the data points that you send us from that standpoint, and one of the things that they're always going through and looking for with the dual degree specifically is a high aptitude and affinity for business analytics. So, if you've taken kind of one-off courses through an online service or through another university, that's a great way to be able to kind of supplement your existing application materials to kind of show that. Again, it's not going to be a make or break thing one way or another, but it's a nice way to kind of supplement that portion for the business analytics specifically focused program. The faculty committee will do a little bit more of a strenuous review for quantitative and analytical aptitude that is a little bit different than the way that we'll approach a general 2-year MBA student, just because there's such a high emphasis on that and it moves fairly quickly within that program. All right. With the slideshow, any suggestions for size ratios? As they come through for us, it's more of I believe it's more of a standard ratio. So you're 4:3. Again, if you're saving it as a PDF before you upload it, it's not going to stretch it the whole way. So as long as you've got it saved in that format, it shouldn't stretch out. So wouldn't worry about that. But yeah, more of a standard ratio probably works well. Okay, a couple more questions that are hanging out here. We've got a couple more minutes yet, so if you've got other questions, feel free to keep on sending them in. If you've got an official version of your scores downloaded, do you still have to have it sent through the GMAT organization using the university code? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. For it to be considered official, and this is also the same with your university transcripts, for it to be considered official for us, it has to come from the issuing organization. So for the GMAT, it has to come from the testing company. For your official transcripts, it has to come directly to us from your university. There are kind of a couple very, very, very rare extenuating cases for that. But probably 99 times out of 100, it's got to come from the issuing organization to be considered an official score. So please keep that in mind. All right, kind of more process question here, but go ahead and throw it out for everybody, just in case anybody else is running into this as well. On the application itself, a score is showing up in the test scores tab, but not in the required materials selection. Is that going to cause a problem? No, our team will go ahead and process that a little bit more manually. There are going to be a couple things in the application process that sometimes will require that physical checkoff to verify that they're there. So that's probably one of those. if you submit your application and then you go back in a couple a couple days later after the deadline and it's still not showing, go ahead and get in touch with our team and we'll take a look specifically. But generally speaking, those will come through the right way. All right. So with that, we're kind of finishing up on the questions here. I'll take any kind of last minute questions that are hanging out. And again, I'll jump back a slide here and remind everybody, go ahead and use our application fee waiver as you put your applications in. You can just type in Irish Web, and that's available for everyone as a thank you for attending the webinar this evening. If you do have specific questions one-on-one, that you'd like to have answered about your application, either if you're having issues or if there's something you're just not sure about, please feel free to get in touch with our team. You can always email into nba.business@nd.edu or call into our office here on campus, and our number is 574-631-8488. We'll have our team available every business day between now and the deadline. So, if you do run into some issues or you have some troubles, please feel free to get in touch with us as well. One last question here, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Any final tips on the essay part of the application? Again, they're the two different application essay choices that you've got there. There's nothing specific. There's not a specific right answer that I'm looking for, but I am looking for something that's thoughtful, something that's well written, something that is authentic. A lot of times you can tell as you're going through and reading in an application if somebody's trying to play buzzword bingo because they're trying to fit in every word that they think I want to hear. That's a lot less authentic than being able to take the topic and really apply it to something that's true in your life. So I'd much rather have that as something that's well written and thought out, because again, a lot of the MBA process is going to be thinking, analysis, and application to what you've already seen. I'd much rather have that than a whole bunch of words that are regurgitated off the website. I already know the website pretty well. I look at it all the time. I want to know what you think. I want to know how our prompts have impacted your thinking and been impacted by your experience. So that's the biggest thing that we're looking for there. Please spell check and grammar check. That's always one way to turn off some folks as we're going through and reading applications. Do your spell check, do your grammar check, make sure that you're all buttoned up there, and that goes for all the different pieces of the application. All right, well, thanks for joining us, everybody. Appreciate you taking the time to listen in. Again, if you've got individual questions for our team over the next couple of days before we get to the round 2 deadline on Tuesday, please reach out and get in touch with us. And we'll look forward to reading a lot of applications starting next week. Thanks so much. Have a great evening.